and good morning to our very first episode of Conversations. I am Joanne Kam, and with me I have my co-host Charmaine Oatman, and today we have our very two special guests, Deputy Minister of Women, Family and Community Development, YB Hannah Yeo, and of course Donovan Chia from Donovan and Ho Partners.
Nice to be here.
So since 2017, the Me Too movement, which started in America, it was a social media movement and it sort of spread across the world. And in the past year, we've had a few organizations that have been caught up in some sexual harassment cases. And, among us, among our friends, our girlfriends, there have been a lot of talk like, what is going on? There's been like a lot of talk about it. And today in Conversations, we're going to address this. We're going to ask the questions with the right people. So I'm going to start off with the first question, which I hope Donovan, you can help.
Yeah.
What is sexual harassment? Like, what constitutes as sexual harassment?
All right, in terms of the law, when we talk about sexual harassment, particularly in the workplace, we have the Employment Act, which specifically defines sexual harassment as any sort of unwanted conduct of a sexual nature. So it's not limited to just physical conduct. It can be things like remarks, physical gestures, even being silent, okay, depending on the context. So that's one reference of how we define sexual harassment.
Yeah.
But Malaysia, we also have this thing called the Malaysian Code of Practice in terms of preventing and eradicating sexual harassment in the workplace. In that Code of Practice, they define sexual harassment, or they split it into two categories. One is called sexual coercion, which is a situation where there's sexual harassment, but it's done in exchange for, let's say, workplace benefits. For example, a woman feels pressured to do certain things in order to get a promotion or in order to get advancement in her career, or she's fearing repercussions if she doesn't do that. Another one is sexual annoyance, which is things like being subjected to conduct which a person finds uncomfortable and unwanted. It could be things like persistent flirting, persistent texting, continuously being asked on a date after you've rejected it in the workplace. So these are some of the examples of how we've defined sexual harassment. But of course, it's not an exhaustive list. It really depends on the context and the people involved.
Well, here's the thing. I think half the time as well, women in the workplace, do we even know how to identify which is which? Are we made aware, that there is sexual harassment or that sexual remarks could actually turn into harassment later on? Or because a lot of times, if we get remarks, sexist remarks and all that, we'll just brush it off like, it's just tea time.
I guess at what point where I think you and I have both been in situations where we do get sort of like sexual remarks, but it's like at what point would you say it counts as harassment? Is it when you tell them to stop and then they don't stop, or?
I think there are a few trigger points that you can look out for if you're a person who feels that you've been subject to sexual harassment. I think first of all, it has to be unwanted. It has to be a situation where you don't like the conduct, you don't want to receive it. Secondly, it's a situation where perhaps you feel that you cannot stop it. So it could be a situation where you've asked the person to stop, but it persists. So you're not in a position to stop it. Thirdly, it could be a situation where you feel prevented from raising the issue or complaining about it, whether due to your work, the person's position of power, the workplace situation. So these are all factors, I would say maybe it's even red flags for you to look at when you are subject to a type of conduct which you feel makes you uncomfortable and could potentially be sexual harassment.
Hannah, I want to ask, in this case, what is the actual sexual harassment law in Malaysia?
Okay.
What does it cover?
At the moment, Penal Code addresses it, but for you to use the Penal Code, it will involve lodging a police report, and also, you have to go beyond reasonable doubt to prove that that incident happened.
How would we do that then?
So, victims will usually have to have proof or witnesses when they lodge the police report. People who will say that it happened. Yes.
And which means that while they are lodging the police report, they bring their witnesses, or
they don't have to bring their witnesses, but when you lodge the police report, you have to have sufficient proof to show that it's beyond reasonable doubt that this person has done this to you. And because of that, usually it involves, currently the cases involve sexual harassment in the workplace. So people are caught off guard because it's supposed to be a safe environment where you're working in discussion. And so a lot of times the victims do not have any proof because it just spontaneously it can happen and nobody has any recording of anything. So I will say for the people out there, if you're a victim, whether or not you want to test whether or not that particular act or that conversation amounts to sexual harassment, I think Google, because actually there are a lot of materials online now to define what sexual harassment is, or talk to somebody. There are many NGOs who are willing to help, women organization, just make a phone call or talk to, we have Talian Kasih, operated by our ministry, is 15999. So if you are not sure, you can make the call and then they will be able to advise you further.
Is there any perhaps steps that we can take to ensure that it's followed through? Because sometimes when we do report it even to the right
HR,
department, HR, nothing's been done. The perpetrator is still in the office. And also the stigma that goes with, highlighting something like that.
Actually, I haven't finished answering your question just now.
Okay.
So one is the Penal Code, that's in existence now. And then of course the Employment Act. If you're in a workplace environment, you can use the Employment Act. So if an incident happens in the workplace, you lodge it to your HR department and they will then take action. They will do the inquiry. If you're a civil servant, we also have a guideline for the civil servants. We will address that complaint. We will take time to investigate and then show cause to the perpetrator, and then we will take the necessary action, whether or not to suspend, to cut their salary, or to remove or terminate them. Right? Okay, so these are the areas where there are specific provisions or legal document to help them. A specific sexual harassment act, we don't have it yet, but we are now in the process of doing an impact study commissioned by our ministry to know or to find out how rampant is this sexual harassment outside. Because we are all talking about workplace, but we have yet to cover university,
outside the workplace,
university
among
ground.
friends,
Sexual harassment can also happen at home.
Yeah.
And how do we address that? So this impact study will help us in preparing the draft. So we are expecting it to be completed end January, early February, and then once we have that finding presented to our ministry, we will then begin to draw up that bill. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that this bill will empower victims to use it effectively. We don't want existing provisions like the one in Penal Code where the victims actually find it very difficult to use it. So you want a user-friendly bill to ensure that this kind of harassment does not continue to happen.
All right. Well, speaking of harassment as well, do you feel that people are aware what is harassment and what is not?
I can comment about this part in terms of the work that I've done. So I normally help employers, sometimes investigate complaints of sexual harassment, and in meeting with people who have said that they are victims of sexual harassment, some of them don't even know that they are victims. So when you talk to them and you ask them, this thing happened to you, they confirm, yes, this happened. But quite a lot of times, I find that people say that, I don't know, is that sexual harassment? They say is it something serious? Or I just assume it's a joke. I assume he's just like that. Or it's like, I don't want to make a big deal out of it.
Because most of the time...
women just want to brush it off.
And a common feel that I get is that it seems to me, majority of people seem to assume that it's only sexual harassment if it's physical. So there's a lot of grey areas to them in terms of like texting, commenting on your attire, asking you out on dates. A lot of these things, they don't view it necessarily as sexual harassment at the time until they get the education and then they look at the context. So quite a lot of times it's the clear-cut thing like, okay, he touched me inappropriately, that's sexual harassment. But anything lower than that, there seems to be a little bit of a lack of awareness in terms of...
And since that now there are a lot more cases popping up, especially in the work environment and all, do you think there is future plans by the ministry perhaps to give out trainers,
Yeah.
training or workshop for especially workplace and even to human resource departments for them to be able to handle these
Yeah.
cases.
I would say based on a few high-profile cases that have come out in the news, there is now greater awareness about sexual harassment, and people look out for symptoms and signs. And now even in our Member of Parliament WhatsApp chat group, we have
Okay.
a lot of WhatsApp chat group.
WhatsApp chat
And people always share jokes and all that, but everybody's more careful now and say, hey, that can potentially be sexual harassment if you're not careful, or
That's right,
don't repeat that outside. We understand it, but people outside might not understand it.
Yeah.
So I think once we have a draft bill, we will definitely be in consultation with the experts, the NGOs, the HR departments, the judges, the lawmakers, people who have already been using the penal code, lawyers and all that, to come together and talk about it more. And at the end of the day, right, what works overseas might not work here. So our bill must also be culturally sensitive. And to make sure, not just Malaysian women, men can
as
also
well,
be victims, in those circumstances, will they be comfortable using that bill?
Had there been any case at all where the men
Donovan,
received-
have you handled any?
Well, not personally, but I'm aware that in terms of legal practice, there are reported cases. So, for example, when an employee is involved in an unfair dismissal case, the industrial court will make a decision about that case, and it's published.
Yeah.
So, I'm personally aware there is like a case involving men being victims of sexual harassment. So, it is possible. Interestingly enough, also the Employment Act doesn't distinguish by gender in terms of sexual harassment. So it doesn't say a female employee; it just says like an employee. So it can apply to men as well. It's just that maybe there's a stigma or something. Men feel uncomfortable to report that they've been sexually harassed. So it could happen. It could be men against men. Men against women, women against women,
and women against men. I just
Yeah.
want to ask you, Donovan, because you've handled a few sexual harassment cases,
Mm.
and in your experience, the victims or the survivors, like in your experience, what drives them? Because I think we've heard of so many of women who have been sexually harassed, and there's too much shame, too much stigma to come forward.
Yeah.
But in your experience, what has pushed these women to actually take action?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times it seems to be, sometimes it's not on their own initiative. It is someone who they've told to, they've told the incident to, and then the person reports on their behalf, they feel concerned for their friend. A lot of times it's their own initiative as well, where they feel enough is enough, or they realize that someone else has gone through a similar situation by the same person in the same company. Then they realize this is more than just me, so then they report. But I think instead of not so much about what drives them to report, I think the interesting thing to really look at is what makes people not report. And in my experience, there's so many factors. I think that you've mentioned number one, shame and trauma. Sometimes the victims feel like it's their fault, that maybe they encouraged it, or they have somehow led the perpetrator on, and they put themselves in that situation. So they feel a little bit of reluctance in bringing it up in case that their conduct gets questioned.
Correct,
Which
because
is,
you also mentioned that you need to have proof.
yeah.
You get what I mean? If not, it's going to be hearsay, the person's word against the other person. So all this will come into play, like, perhaps I may have flirted with him. That's why he's sending me all these messages at night. There's always this, what if I were the one that started it?
Correct. Correct.
So how do we then identify or even investigate as employers?
Which brings us back to that issue about consent. So consent is a very fluid thing. I think again, not many people understand that just because you consented at one particular time doesn't mean that consent is ongoing in perpetuity for all conduct. So there's this situation sometimes that people say, at one point I flirted with him, but at a certain point after that it becomes uncomfortable and I tell him to stop. And if he continues after that, it can still be sexual harassment. The fact that you consented at one particular time doesn't mean that you are consenting forever. So it's all this, the fluid nature of this context,
which is
really important.
Like we should re-educate ourselves in this industry about it. Because right now everything is, no one's going to go to Google. Everything is so great. So if I buy him teh tarik, today, and then he accepts it. I mean, coming from my perspective, and then if I continue to buy and he doesn't accept it, would that be then constitute as harassment.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're right. It is consent, right?
Right.
It's whether you are okay with it, you are comfortable with
But
it.
people don't understand consent enough
Yeah.
in this. I mean, we're not even talking about the work environment. I'm talking about. I know I'm diversifying a bit, but I have a 13-year-old daughter. But now is the time when you should be talking to them about consent, what's appropriate and what's not, and this should also go into systems at the school.
Correct.
So okay. So let's just say scenario you are being sexually harassed by a colleague or like a superior in your office. So what are the steps like one should take if they want to like take action? Like, do they go to the HR or?
I think number one, definitely you have to speak up. If you feel something has been done that is not appropriate and you're not happy with it, you have to speak up, whether it is to your HR department, your manager, if it's he's not involved, or someone else in the company that you feel comfortable with. I think you definitely have to raise it. Number two, you can always look at your company's own internal policy and guidelines. I know some companies, they have a little bit more structure in terms of grievance procedures. They may have like an avenue that you can contact if you feel that something has happened which you're not happy about. It could be independent, a third party. It could be someone inside the company itself. So a good starting point is to talk to HR, I would think. If there's any policy about lodging a complaint, they will be able to tell you. So,
If the complaint has been done and nothing has been done by the company, what next?
Okay, let me just comment on the civil service. For the civil service, you usually, before this, they have the guideline. It involves you reporting to the higher authority in your department. But based on the Sungai Buloh incident, where the perpetrator was the head of
boss,
department,
Head of department.
we have since suggested and recommended to JPA to amend that guideline to say, you now report it to the integrity unit. So in the civil service, we have an integrity unit for every ministry. Okay, so you go straight to the integrity unit, bypass your superior, an alleged perpetrator, and integrity unit will then investigate. Okay, and then they will take some time to investigate, and then show cause will be given. But for the Sungai Buloh incident, what happened was 2 victims came forward, and then the health minister and myself, we did a press conference to say, hey, we believe there are more victims. Please come and contact us. And then after that, we had more than 30 witnesses or victims contacted us and came forward to testify. Because of the volume of witnesses, the health minister then set up an inquiry body comprising doctors and also 2 reps from our women ministry to make sure that the welfare and the interests of the victims are taken care of. So based on that recommendation, that committee's investigation, the action was then taken, and then finally after we completed the SOP and he was served with a termination letter. Okay, but that didn't take just a short time. It took us some few months because, like I said, everybody is afraid of the unfair dismissal part, right? And also in that particular case, they have actually tried lodging a complaint years before,
but it was not taken.
It was not taken. So I will say to the victims, don't give up. Don't give up if you feel, if you lodge and then no action is taken, approach a different body and find ways for it to come out. So that's exactly what happened.
So Hannah, you mentioned that it took a while. It took a few months. So during these few months, the 30 women that came forward, the doctor is still
that's
there.
right.
So how did they manage those
so
months?
What we did was, because he was also the head of department and it was a very uneasy and very uncomfortable environment. So the health ministry told him to go on leave while investigation was ongoing. And that's why, based on that experience, we say that whatever bill we're going to draw up, we must cut short the time for inquiry because it's very uncomfortable for victims. So what happened in that case was, instead of going for the perpetrator, people were releasing petitions in favor of the perpetrator, in favor of the witnesses. So the 2 groups, and there were a lot of confusion, rumors going on. That instead of him being suspended, he's now being promoted. What are you all doing? So a lot of hearsay, a lot of confusion. So I say we must cut it short.
Shorter time period. Donovan, like, because you work with companies dealing with sexual harassment, and I know most companies have their employees handbook, right?
That's right.
Do most companies, do they have like a sexual harassment like clause in the employees handbook, or is that the next step forward that HR should include a clause in their handbook?
I think it's present. I mean, some companies have it. I can't say all or most, but I think definitely there's a lot more awareness in the past few years. You know, not just because of the incident in Malaysia, you know, even like the Me Too movement in the US and all that. So that has filtered down here, where we do see a lot more employers trying to look at their existing policies to see whether they do specifically address sexual harassment. Sometimes they don't. Unfortunately, they just lump it under like a general misconduct thing, which is also present, but sometimes you need a little bit more specificity because of things like, you know, taking care of victims, protecting confidentiality. Sometimes you need to fine tune a little bit more when it comes to sexual harassment.
Also, NGOs like Women Aid Organization, they provide training for employers. So I've actually launched a co-working space, because co-working space, you have people coming in and out, not a fixed, you know,
office,
fixed office. So they actually have SOP drawn up. They train their workers. You know, how do we reach out to people and how do we receive complaints? So employers who are keen can actually contact some of these NGOs who are providing training.
So like employers can seek these NGOs out, or is there a body in the ministry like your department that can advise them what to do next? Right?
We do hope that the bill will be able to address empowering employers, so that, you know, that we can deal with the volume. At the moment in our ministry, I don't think we have the capacity to go and train every single employer. So we do rely and work closely with NGOs who have the expertise and time to actually do that.
All right.
So Hannah, what I want to ask is, is the ministry looking to perhaps providing counselling sessions for the victims involved?
After the Sungai Buloh incident, we realized that those incidents impacted these young doctors. Even though that incident has happened for some time, some of them still cry when they retell that story. And because of that, we realized that these experiences don't just go away. And the health ministry then organized and make counseling available to these doctors. So I will suggest to victims out there or survivors, don't overestimate yourself and think that, you know, I'll be fine, I should be okay. It is wise to get counseling because, you know, you want it to not leave a mark over your life. You know, you want to be able to function in the workplace without having this negative thing hanging over your head. So I would strongly suggest and recommend counseling.
Should we look at your department for counselling, or there are other avenues out there that we perhaps can go to?
Yes, there are actually many counselling services available in the hospitals. There are also counselling services, but for those who want to find out more, you can call our general hotline 15999, tell your story, and then they will advise you accordingly. Yes.
Donovan, so you are the thorn among the roses here. And so, you know, you've dealt with so many sexual harassment cases. Being a male lawyer, and then I'm sure like most of the clients that you deal with, they're, you know, women. How has it been for them, you know, working with a male lawyer, and how as a man, how has, you know, working with these cases like changed you?
I think it's definitely been very interesting, you know, coming across all these different cases that I've handled. It as you mentioned, being a male, I think we take a lot of things for granted. Like when I speak to all these women who have been victims of sexual harassment, it really makes you realize what you as a male most of the time you don't have to deal with. So in the workplace, you know, there's all these issues of, do I need to go out with this particular person at night? If I go out, what will people say? Am I inviting something? So these are all these incidents which I myself, I don't have to deal with. When I have a client or I have to go out with my boss, I don't think about that as a male. But there's all this, you know, subtext that's going on, and it could open doors for sexual harassment. These are all the problems that are being faced in the workplace. So it has really helped me understand that, you know, sometimes the things that you do or the things that you say, you may think that it's perfectly fine, it's innocent, you know, we are in this Asian culture, you don't be so sensitive about a lot of things, don't cause problems. So it really makes you look at things from a different perspective. And I think in terms of dealing with female victims, again, it depends on the person. Sometimes, naturally, women who are victims, they feel more comfortable talking to another woman.
Yeah.
So, and in that case, if you're an employer looking into a complaint, if you find that the victim is not comfortable talking to the person you've appointed, it's good to have like at least an option available for them. You don't have to go to one specific person. It should be someone, either a man or a woman you choose from a different department, internal, external. Give them some options. I think that helps, because not everyone is so comfortable that they can just talk to a random person that they meet about something that happened to them. Sometimes even small things like, it's a man, I don't want to talk to him. I think a woman will understand me better. I think that's a fair thing for them to go through, and employers should take that into account.
And I think, Hannah, you did mention in one of your articles that employers or human resource department should create a group to handle information like this, or to be able to perhaps take into consideration a better way to address it before it goes into investigation, right?
Yes. Some of the things that people can learn, including the complainant or friends who are very concerned, sometimes in our zealousness to expose the wrongdoer, right, we punish the victim again and again by naming the victim and circulating. For example, that email on BFM, there were so many innocent victims' names mentioned, and it just went viral. And I think the Malaysian public must also be educated on what do you share, what do you not share, how do you protect and safeguard the victim. And so for the HR department, I think it's important to have a solid team of include counsellors also, if possible.
So the solid team shouldn't be just within the company.
Correct. I mean, you can pull in external parties outside. So I want to comment on that BFM experience. They pull in lawyers, external party, to come and do a fair inquiry. You know, so these are some of the suggestions that it might not be just internal mechanism set up, but you can actually include outside. NGO. You can talk to some NGOs. So for the health ministry, it involved the health ministry, but what they did, they roped us in. The women ministry then came in and sat together in the panel. So the victims felt like, okay, I know that there will be no cover up because there's another woman ministry looking after the welfare of the victims.
I think they want to feel safe, right? They want to feel like they'll be protected. Earlier we mentioned about there are some cases where people have been falsely accused. So Donovan, maybe you can advise if you have been falsely accused, male or female, what should you do?
I think when we talk about sexual harassment, so we have to understand there's two parties involved. One is the person who is being accused of sexual harassment, and the other person is the victim. Alright, so we always have to balance the rights, and both of them have rights. Okay, it's not just only the victim has rights. A person who is accused has rights as well. So that's why I think investigation is the key thing. Conducting an independent and thorough investigation is very important, because at the end of the day, you need to assess whether is this complaint frivolous or is it justified. And if a person is falsely accused, then of course they have their rights available to them under the law. If they feel that this person has defamed them and it's not justified, there's evidence to show that it never took place, there are legal avenues available for the accused person as well. So I think it's very important as an employer in the workplace, if you're dealing with this complaint, you have to be sure that you treat both parties fairly.
But it's such a difficult
gray area.
And although I'm not wanting to give more light to the ones that are being accused, but what happens after that? Like after the name have been called, after they've accused, they've been fired, how do they move on from there? Is there even moving on? Because everybody knows already, you've been charged with sexual harassment.
You see, later on when we have the specific act on sexual harassment, there will be certain career or job where they will no longer be a suitable candidate. For example, in our ministry, we're developing the Working with Children check to make sure that people who are employed to work with children do not have prior convictions, right? So if they are charged in future using the Sexual Harassment Act and found guilty, definitely their name will be in that database.
So it's like a
And-
sex offender
Yeah,
registry.
Correct,
Okay.
correct. So
Yeah.
different employers or different bodies, when they want to hire, they have their own mechanism to check whether or not this
Yeah.
person is suitable for the job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I won't say that they will be out of job forever,
Forever, yeah.
but there may be jobs that will no longer be suitable for them. Yeah, and also some of these high-profile cases, because of the nature of that complaint being exposed, I think they will struggle to get a job ever again. Yeah.
One final questions before we wrap up and all that. Why do you think so many victims, do not want to come forth?
Based on our experience handling the Sungai Buloh incident, a lot of them young doctors, and they have their career ahead of them. And when I first heard that victims were doctors, I thought to myself, surely they must be very empowered to speak up. But usually the system in a workplace, for them to pass their exam, for them to get leave, they have to go back to this perpetrator. As a result, whether or not, after studying so many years in medical school, do you really want to spoil your chance by reporting? And what if he is not fired, and then I will be blacklisted, and what will happen to my degree? Yeah, so all these were considerations, and it silenced some of the victims for a long time. And so what we realized is that shame, right, of reporting. The victims struggle, especially if they're married or they're in a relationship, because for them to report, they have to go through the entire episode all over again. And a lot of them just say this: they just want that perpetrator to be removed from the toxic environment. They just don't want to see that person again. But they fall short of going all the way to lodge a police report to make sure that this person is sent to jail. Yeah, because like I say, if you're married, coming forward to testify will be very uncomfortable. Yeah.
How will the act or the bill help in this situation?
Yep. Definitely, I think we want to make reporting easier.
Okay.
Right? And maybe we also have to look into the confidentiality part, protecting the whistleblower or even the victims. At the moment, you have to name the complainant, and that was a difficulty we encountered. And so the Health Ministry had to step forward and become the complainant after setting up their own inquiry. So there were so many processes involved. If people don't understand, they'll think that, you're delaying it, but no, you just want to cover all grounds.
And I think what you mentioned earlier about the bill hopefully empowering employers, I think that's really important, because there's a lot of fear on the
Because
employer
it's the
side.
employer side
If
as
I do
well.
the wrong thing, I terminate someone because of an allegation of sexual harassment. If he comes and sues
Will
me,
I be protected or not?
am I comfortable enough that the law will protect me for taking the right action? So I think empowering the employer is also very important, because they are the ones that will probably be the first port of call when there's something happens in the workplace.
I think the general rule for sexual harassment is if it makes you feel uncomfortable, then very likely that amounts to sexual harassment.
I think what we hope in the future that is more people are more I won't say
Aware.
confident, but they're not so scared to come forward, and hopefully with the bill passed, people are more confident they can, and hopefully with our discussion today, people are more informed and they can lodge the reports.
Well, the process is going to take a while, I'm sure. In your opinion, do you think it will be passed?
Do I think it will be passed? Oh, definitely. I mean, we just look at the public outpouring, the public response to the big cases, how the media also, the Star put it front page. And based on the response, we know that this is a very needed bill. And from our ministry point of view, this is the top priority for us. In introducing new law, sexual harassment tops the list.
And we hope that it will be passed very soon.
Okay, that's all the time we have for today's episode of Conversations. We hope you got all the information that you needed if you've been sexually harassed in the workplace, or if you know someone who has been sexually harassed, or if you have any other questions on what to do, you can call Talian Kasih 15999.
Thank you to Hannah and Donovan for being here and for sharing some light on this particular conversations.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so what should we?